Hello, my name is Faith Phillips, and I'm the Director of Student Financial Services at The Ohio State University at Newark and Central Ohio Technical College. In this presentation, we'll cover the 2024-2025 financial aid process. The financial aid process begins with completing the FAFSA form at studentaid.gov. FAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Families are encouraged to watch for websites that are not affiliated with or are endorsed by the U.S. Department of Education that may charge a fee for submitting the FAFSA form. We also encourage families to avoid paying for assistance in the financial aid process or for applying for scholarships. For students that are beginning enrollment in the fall of 24, possibly the summer of 24, they will complete the 24-25 FAFSA form. The FAFSA typically is available beginning October 1st, but due to FAFSA simplification, major changes have been made to the FAFSA process, and the 24-25 date has yet to be announced. We are told that the FAFSA will be available sometime in December of 23. Once the FAFSA is live, we encourage all students to submit the FAFSA by any college's FAFSA priority date. This date can be found by looking at a college's financial aid website or speaking to their admissions representative. Many colleges set this FAFSA priority date to encourage families to submit the FAFSA as soon as possible so that we can send out financial aid offers, knowing that families are wanting to do a comparison between the different colleges that they are applying for. So the earlier that a student submits their FAFSA form, the earlier we can get a financial aid offer out to them. In addition, submitting the FAFSA by that FAFSA priority date could maximize the amount of financial aid that a student may be eligible for. A student does not have to be admitted to the college in order to add them to the FAFSA form and have it submitted to that college. However, most colleges and universities will not review the FAFSA form until it has an admissions application to match up with it. Students need to reapply for or submit that FAFSA form every year. And our understanding is that the 25-26 FAFSA should go live on October 1st of 2024. The FAFSA form is the only application that a student needs to complete to apply for federal grants, federal work study, and federal student loans. It is also the only form that they need to complete to apply for state of Ohio grants. And in many cases, it is the application to apply for institutional scholarships and grants. Some institutions may ask the student to complete an additional financial aid form that they will only use for their institutional funds. Students should reach out to their financial aid representative or their admissions representative to find out if an additional financial aid form is required. The FAFSA form will collect demographic information regarding the student and their parents if they are a dependent student, as well as taxable and untaxable income for 2022, and assets, which would be as of the date that the FAFSA form is signed. We encourage all students to submit the FAFSA form regardless of family income. Income is not the only factor in determining a student's eligibility for financial aid, especially for institutional aid. So by not submitting a FAFSA form each year, the student may be missing out on opportunities that they would otherwise be considered for. Once the FAFSA form is submitted, it is processed by the federal processor and a student aid index is calculated. This is an index or a figure that the schools use to determine how much financial aid the student is eligible for and from which funds. It is a calculated result that is from information that is provided on the FAFSA form, calculated using a formula that is established in law. The student aid index is the same regardless of the institution that the student sends the FAFSA to. So the student's ability to pay is what that student aid index is indicating, and that figure stays the same and reported to all schools. Factors that determine that student aid index are the student and parent income, taxable and untaxable, and for the 24-25 year, that is the 22 tax information, student and parent assets, as well as the family size. Before submitting the FAFSA form or beginning the process, students and parents need to apply for a Federal Student Aid ID or FSA ID. This is their account username and password. It is used to access the FAFSA form as well as to electronically sign the application. It is required of all students and parents whose information will be on the FAFSA form. The FSA ID should be requested at least 3 days before beginning the FAFSA process. Students and parents will need a Social Security number to apply for an FSA ID. For parents that do not have a Social Security number, there is a separate verification process that those parents will need to complete. This will be using information that is available from the credit bureaus, and this process is not yet available but should be in December when the FAFSA goes live. In addition, each student and parent will need to use a mobile phone number and an email address. Those email addresses and phone numbers cannot be the same. Students should not use their high school email address. And again, each parent and student need to have a separate mobile number and email. When the FAFSA, the FSA ID is created, students will be using a multi-factor authentication to log into the FAFSA website. When you create the FSA ID, you are using this MFA, and it is a one-time code that can be sent to either an email, a text, or an app that is used to authenticate the student in addition to the username and password. When this multi-factor authentication step is set up, students are also given a one-use backup code. They should write this code down. In the event that they are unable to access the FAFSA using their a text code or an email code, they could use this authenticator code as a backup code to log into the FAFSA form. This is what the new FAFSA, the 24-25 FAFSA landing page will look like when a student goes to apply. For the 24-25 FAFSA form, we are introducing what is called contributors, and those are any people who will be providing information on the FAFSA form. So the student and the student's spouse, if the student is married, or if the student is dependent, the parent or parents will be submitting the FAFSA form are called contributors. They are designed to allow the contributor to complete their portion pertinent to them, and each contributor must provide consent and approval for the retrieval and disclosure of their federal tax information. So when a family logs into the FAFSA form, they are giving consent for federal student aid to access their tax information directly from the IRS. And this consent and approval is required of each contributor. Each contributor must complete and sign their own respective sections of the FAFSA form. An incomplete application will not have a student aid index calculated, and the applicant will not be eligible for federal, state, and some institutional aid. So in other words, if a contributor does not provide their consent and approval to have their federal tax information sent over to the FAFSA form, the student could still submit the FAFSA form, but it will not calculate a student aid index, and the student would not be considered eligible for financial aid until that consent and approval is provided. On the FAFSA form, the student is answered a series of personal questions that determine whether or not their parents' information must go on the FAFSA form. So if the student is determined to be dependent, parents must apply with the student. And if the student is determined to be independent, the student applies separately without parents, and they include their spouse if they are married. Categories that would make a student independent would be turning 24 as of January 1st, being a graduate student pursuing a master's degree or beyond. The student is married, a veteran, or in active duty. The student has children or dependents of their own that they provide more than 50% support for. Or a student that was an orphan, ward of the court, or in foster care at any time beyond the age of 13. A student who is emancipated or is in a legal guardianship situation, or an unaccompanied youth who is homeless or at risk for homelessness and is self-supporting. In most cases, most high school students will be considered a dependent student for financial aid, and parents' information will be required. The parent of record or the parent that submits the FAFSA form can only be a biological or an adoptive parent. And if those parents are not married but living together, the student would report the information regarding both of their parents. If biological or adoptive parents are divorced, the student would provide the information about the parent that provides most of the financial support in 12 months prior to completing the FAFSA form, even if that student does not live with that parent. And this is a change for 24-25 compared to prior years. So it is the parent that provided the most financial support in the last 12 months prior to completing the FAFSA is the parent that would be submitting the FAFSA form. If the support provided to the student is equal, the student would use the parent that has the greater income and assets. And if that parent is remarried, the student would report the information about their parent's spouse or their step parent. When the student logs in to the FAFSA form using their FSA ID, they will need to provide what is called consent in order to be eligible for federal student aid. So the student is providing consent for their federal tax information to be transferred directly from the FAFSA or from the IRS onto the FAFSA form. The student is then provided with their identity information that they provided when they applied for their FSA ID. It is carried forward into their FAFSA form and pre-populates the application for them with their date of birth, their social security number, their email, their phone number, as well as their mailing address. Then the student is asked about their personal circumstances. This is the dependency determination questions, where it determines whether or not a student's parents' information needs to be included. So if a student checks none of these apply to all of these questions, then they are considered to be dependent. The student is then asked if they are an unaccompanied youth who is either homeless or self-supporting and at risk for homelessness. If the student says yes to this question, they are also considered independent and parents' information would not be included. Then the student is asked, do they have unusual circumstances? So they were not able to say yes to the prior dependency questions, but they have an unusual situation that would be preventing them from contacting their parents, or contacting their parents to complete the FAFSA form would pose a risk to the student. So for example, they left home due to an abusive or threatening environment, or they've been abandoned or estranged from their parents. If the student has this circumstance, they would say yes to this question, and it would allow them to move forward and submit the FAFSA form, and it would calculate a student aid index and consider them provisionally independent. When the FAFSA is received by the schools, they will reach out to the student to discuss these circumstances to confirm their dependency status. If the student doesn't have unusual circumstances, however, their parents are not willing to provide information on the FAFSA form, the student could say yes, that they do have parents that are not submitting the FAFSA form on their behalf. And the student could then be considered for an unsubsidized student loan only in this situation. The student would be able to submit the FAFSA form to all of the colleges indicated. A student aid index would not be provided, and the student would work with the college then to apply for just this unsubsidized student loan. We are going to move forward with this presentation now with the assumption that the student is a dependent student. So now the FAFSA is asking the student to tell them about their parents. So they want to know, are the parents married? And they ask about the parents' marital status. Then the student will be asked to provide information regarding the parents that will be submitting the FAFSA form. So if the student said the parents are married or are living together, then it's going to ask them for information about two parents, the parent and the parent spouse. If the student indicates in the marital status that the parents are not married or remarried, then it will only ask for information for one parent. At this point, the student will need to provide this information about their parent, which includes their name, their social security number, their date of birth, and their email address. And this will be sending an email to each of those parents, inviting them to complete their portion of the FAFSA form. The student must provide the parent's social security number if the parent has one. If the parent does not have a social security number, they can click the box that my parent does not have a social security number. Then the student is asked demographic information about their gender, their race, and their ethnicity. These questions are for research purposes only, and they do not have an impact on federal financial aid. Actually, the schools do not even see the student's response to these questions. The student has to answer these questions to progress forward. However, prefer not to answer is an option for each of these questions. Then it will discuss information about the student's tax return. So remember, the student is giving consent for federal student aid to receive the information from the IRS if the student filed a 22 tax return. And it will bring it over and populate the income information for the student. However, there are a couple questions that the student does need to answer regarding their 22 tax information. Then the student is asked about their assets, which are as of the date that they signed the form. So the student would indicate as of today, what is their current total of cash savings and checking accounts? What is their current net worth of business and investment farms? And what is their current net worth of investments, including real estate? The student needs to put an answer in here. So if 0 is their answer, they need to indicate that here. Then the student is asked what colleges do they want to have the FAFSA released to? And they may list up to 20 colleges on this first submission of their FAFSA form. So for a student that is undecided and considering multiple colleges, they are encouraged to list any college that they are considering. Remember, they can add them here even if they have not applied for admission yet. However, most colleges will not look at their FAFSA form until they can find an admissions application to match up with it. So the student would search for the school by entering the state, the city, and or the school name, or if they know the federal school code, they can simply enter the federal school code. And they can again add up to 20 colleges on the first submission of the FAFSA form. If at some point they realize that they did not add a college that they want to have the FAFSA released to, they may log back into the FAFSA form, make a correction, add the school that they want to have the FAFSA released to, and resubmit that FAFSA form. In general, it does not matter in which order they list the colleges and universities. When the FAFSA is processed and sent to each college, only the school that receives the FAFSA form sees their institution. They do not see any of the other institutions that were listed. Then the student can review all of their answers here on this review page. They can click the hyperlink and it takes them back to that section if they want to make a correction. Otherwise, they're now ready to provide their signature. The student on this review page can see if the parent or parents that they sent the invite to complete their part as a contributor, whether or not they have responded to that invite. The student will read this information and consent and provide their signature and complete their part of the FAFSA form. Since at this point, in this case, this parent information has not been provided, the FAFSA form is not considered complete and cannot be submitted and processed just yet. However, the student has completed their portion and they receive this information letting them know that their FAFSA has been completed by them and they're now waiting for their contributors to complete their part. This is a screenshot of the email that the parent receives when the student sends the invite to them. This is not the actual site. This is the email. So the parent would get this email when the student sends the invite, and the parent would click log in, and they would use their FSA ID, their username and password, to log in and complete their portion of the FAFSA form. This is the parent login where they enter their username and password, and they also will have that multi-factor authentication where they will have to have a code sent to either a text or an email, or they use the app to authenticate them before they can complete the login process. Once into the FAFSA, Each contributor will see this page that explains why they're completing the FAFSA, and it is important to note that by completing the FAFSA form, the parent is not consenting to paying for the student's education. They are simply agreeing to have their information provided on the FAFSA form and released to all of the schools that the student indicates. And then the FAFSA helps the student determine how much aid they're eligible for. It does not commit the parent to paying for the student's education. Then the parent will see the parent identity information, their name and social security number, date of birth, the information that is pulling over from their federal student aid ID application. The student, or excuse me, the parent at this time then provides their consent, or the student will not be eligible for federal financial aid. And again, they are consenting to have their 22 federal tax information imported from the IRS directly to the FAFSA form. Then the FAFSA will ask the parent to confirm their family size. So the parent's family size initially is based on the individuals that they claimed on their 22 tax return. And the parent won't see this number. So the federal student aid is asking the parent, is the parent's family size different than the number of individuals claimed on their 22 tax return? So for example, the parent that is submitting the FAFSA form on their 22 tax return, they claimed 4. If that family size is correct, then they can say yes and move on. If that family size is not correct, then they can say no, and it will allow them to update the family size. It will automatically populate the number for the parent based on whether the parents are married or not. So it knows whether there should be one parent or 2 parents, and then it will include the student. So in this scenario, there are 2 parents and of course the 1 student. So right now the family size is 3. So then down below, it's asking, in addition to those 3 people in the household, are there other dependents who live with the parents and will receive half of their support? And they would put that number in this box. So let's just use an example. You have a family of 4. You got a mom, a dad, and 2 children, and you're filing the FAFSA form for your oldest child. Your family size is 4. We recommend all families actually just say when it asks, is the parent's family size different from the number of individuals claimed on the tax return? We recommend the family say yes and go ahead and put in what the family size is. Even if you believe the exemptions are correct, or excuse me, the individuals claimed on the 22 tax return are correct, that way you can make sure that you are reporting an actual family size. So again, above where the parent's family size is, you're starting with however many parents are on the FAFSA form plus the student, and then down below, any other dependents. Now the FAFSA screenshot that is here says dependents who live with the parent. But if you have a sibling of the student that is away at college and is not currently living with the parent, but they are considered a dependent of the student, then you would include them here in this household size. And as you enter a number in this box, the parent's family size up above will increase. Then the next question will ask the parent, of the people in the family, how many will be in college between July 1st of 24 and June 30 of 25, and do not include the parent. So at the very minimum, you need to have 1 here, and that is the student that you're submitting the FAFSA for. And if anyone other than the parent is in college that was listed in the family size, you can include them here. It's important to note that the response to this question does not impact student aid eligibility in 24-25. In prior years, the number of a college did impact the actual outcome of the FAFSA form. It no longer impacts the calculation of the student aid index, but it is a required field to be completed. Then the FAFSA will ask the parent about the parent's assets. This assets questions are the same as the student, except for the first question here that asks about the parent's annual child support received. So if the parent or parents received child support in the last completed calendar year, they would put that amount in this question. Then it asks for the parent your current total of cash savings and checking account. And then it asks current net worth of business and investment farm. Now, this question has changed a little compared to prior years. In prior years, it was if you had 100 or fewer employees in the business or investment farm, you did not include the value here. That has been removed. So if the parent or student has a business or an investment farm, they must list the value in the asset section. And then the question about current net worth of investments, including real estate. So let's talk about what assets are not reported. So you do not report the primary residence of the parent. You do not report the value of life insurance plans, and you do not report the value of any retirement plans. So in the state of Ohio, for example, PERS, STIRS, or SIRS, a 401k, pension funds, annuities, non-education IRAs, and KEOG plans. Do not list any of these as an asset. What you do list as an asset is any real estate that you own that is not the home that you live in, any rental properties that you own, trust funds, again, that business and or investment farm value, UGMA and UTMA accounts, money market funds, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, and CDs, other securities and commodities, installment and land sale grants, contracts, and qualified education benefits or 529 savings plans. Now, for those 529 plans, you are indicating the value for the owner. So if the parent is the owner and the student is the beneficiary, you list the value of the 529 plan under the parent section of the assets, not the student. If the parent is not the owner, but someone else is, for example, a grandparent or an aunt and uncle, and the student is the beneficiary, the asset of the 529 plan is not listed as an asset here on the FAFSA form. And for assets, you report the net worth of the assets, which is the value today minus any debt. And a negative value is reported as a 0. Now this parent has completed their portion of the FAFSA. Remember, most of the information is being imported directly from the IRS through that federal tax information. And now they are ready to sign and complete their section of the FAFSA. So they read all of the fine print there, and they click the box and they click sign. And now that the FAFSA has the parent section and the student section completed, the parent will be the one that is signing and submitting the FAFSA form. The student will receive an email then letting them know that their FAFSA has been completed, and they can then see the calculated student aid index. The parent, if they are the ones that submit the FAFSA form, they will receive a confirmation page, but it does not show them the calculated student aid index, and it sends an email notification to the student. So, what if there are circumstances that are preventing you from completing the application online? And we know that some families may have some concern about getting all of those FSA IDs for the parent. There is an option still of completing a paper application, which will be available at studentaid.gov. It is a PDF document that parents and students can download and print and complete by hand and mail off to the federal processor for processing. However, that process will take a long time for the FAFSA to be processed, several weeks. So they need to keep in mind if they cannot do an electronic version and they do the paper application, they need to complete it as soon as possible after it becomes available. So what if you have special circumstances? So for example, we're asking you to complete the 24-25 FAFSA form and you're using your 22 federal tax information. But what if that income information is not indicative of the family's current financial circumstances? Colleges and universities are able to take these special circumstances into consideration. So these are conditions that exist that cannot be documented or explained on the current FAFSA form. So the families need to complete the FAFSA as directed with their 22 tax information, and then contact the school's financial aid office or offices if you're looking at multiple institutions, and provide a written explanation and documentation of the circumstances that have changed. The school will review and request any additional information if necessary, and then make a determination on if that special circumstance would make a difference for the student. And if it does, then the school will reprocess that FAFSA application on behalf of the student and recalculate that student aid index and hopefully change the student's financial aid offer. The school's decision on this process are final and cannot be appealed to the U.S. Department of Education. Examples of these special circumstances would include loss of employment, which is the most common one that we see. So from 22 to either 23 or 24, a family member has lost their job or has been laid off or has retired. Or loss of child support, which child support tends to end when a student turns 18 or ceases to be in high school. So they could appeal the amount of child support that they reported under the asset section to have the FAFSA recalculated. Or if unfortunately a parent would pass away after the FAFSA has been submitted, the school would want to recalculate the student's eligibility based on the remaining parent, or if a parent separated or divorced during the time after the FAFSA was submitted. So once the FAFSAs are processed and sent to the institution, which will probably be sometime in January of 24, the colleges will start to bring in those FAFSAs in January and February and start to review and determine, is there additional information that we need from students? So some FAFSAs are selected for a process called verification, which is a random selection by federal student aid to simply ensure that families have completed the FAFSA accurately. It is not an accusation of providing wrong information purposely. It is simply to just randomly poll and evaluate whether those FAFSAs were completed accurately. So we could ask the student to document their 22 tax returns or W-2s. They may be asked to document their family size by completing a form where they would list their household members and their relationship. There could be an identity and statement of educational purpose. So if the school needs additional information, they will reach out to the student and the parent and say, what documentation we need. And the student needs to respond to that request for additional information as soon as possible so that the financial aid office can continue in the process of determining the student's financial aid offer. And then when the financial aid is final, the student will receive an email or something in regular mail letting them know that their financial aid offer is now available for them. That offer will include the amount of aid that they have been awarded and from each program, how and when that aid will be dispersed, and the terms and conditions of that student's offer. Many colleges and universities today use what is called a student portal and a school assigned email account. So it is important when a student applies for admission that they pay attention to all of the information that comes in the mail to the student from those colleges and universities, because they may be asking the student to activate a school issued email account and start to monitor that on a regular basis. Many colleges will only then communicate with that student through that email account. So they could miss out on knowing that they need verification documents, for example, if they have not activated that email and they're not checking it on a regular basis. And then in addition, they will be asked to log into a school portal. So they'll be given a school username and they'll create a password. And then they'll be asked to log into that portal to see online information, such as registering for classes, viewing their financial aid, viewing their bill. Many colleges don't send those financial aid offers or student bills home in the mail. They actually ask the student to watch their school email account, and they'll receive an email that says that they can now log into the school portal and view their financial aid or their bill. Also, that portal may be where the student will sign up for orientation for this in the summer prior to starting college. So I can't stress enough that the student needs to activate those email accounts. And if they're looking at more than one school, they may be activating for a period of time multiple emails and monitoring multiple emails until they have selected their institution of choice. And then they can just focus on that school's email account and school portal. One final important note for parents to understand is once a student enrolls in college, Their college records, academics, and finances are protected under a law called FERPA, the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act. And this is very similar to the health protection privacy, HIPAA. So when a student enrolls, if a student has not given the college or university permission to speak to a parent or a guardian or someone on behalf of the student, the school is limited in the information that they can share with them. Many colleges have created a student information release form on their school portal where a student can go in and indicate the name and relationship and contact information of the person that they want the school to be able to speak to. So in this example that you see on the screen, the student can give the name and relationship, contact information, and has to create an access code so that when that parent or guardian logs in or calls in to the school to get information about the student's financial aid status or their billing status, the school will look to see, is that person that's calling in listed on the student information release, and do they know that access code? And in most cases, the student has the authority to indicate if they want the school to be able to speak on their academic information, on their account information, and their financial aid information. So the school will not only need to confirm who they're speaking with that they're permitted to, but what information are they permitted to release? And we like to stress this to families because we want you to know before you start calling in and you're frustrated because you can't get information about a student's bill or a student's financial aid because you've not been given permission for us to speak with them. So that concludes this presentation. I know that's a lot of information to digest and process. So if you have questions about the financial aid process, about the FAFSA, about the FSA ID, please do not hesitate to reach out to the OASFAA Outreach Committee. We're here to answer your questions, and you can email us at outreach@oasfa.org. Thank you.